All right, so I'm about a solid 20 hours after posting the last video breaking down UFC 311. Islam versus Arman, or so we thought, because apparently now that main event is canceled. Not only is it canceled, it was canceled at like 1 a.m. this morning. Apparently, Arman Tsarukyan had a terrible back injury that I guess was getting worse, and by the late hours of the night or the morning, I don't know, I'm on the East Coast, they're on the West Coast, but early this morning or late last night, it got to a point where he was no longer, at least in his mind, fit to compete. And here are Dana White's actual official words about this fight.
Buddy, I have some breaking news for you this morning. Around 1 a.m. we received a call from Arman Tsarukyan, who informed us that he was experiencing significant back pain due to the injury. He feels like he is not healthy enough to compete, so he is out of the fight. Stepping in to face Islam Makhachev for the title will be Renato Moicano. Moicano's been on a tear since moving up to 155 pounds and currently holds the longest active win streak amongst all fighters in the top 10 of the lightweight division. He's won 6 of his last 7 fights, including his last 4 in a row, with 3 of those coming by finish. The guy is an absolute savage, and every fight he's in is a war. He weighed in on championship weight to be prepared as the backup in case something happened. And when we spoke to him this morning, I can tell you, he wants this fight. And when I called Islam, Islam said, brother, I am the champion. Fight anyone. Ladies and gentlemen, the pound-for-pound #1 fighter in the world, Islam Makhachev versus Renato Moicano for the lightweight title. Live tomorrow night from the Intuit Dome in Los Angeles, California. I will see you there.
Gotta hand it to him. Whether you love him or hate him, the guy's a hell of a promoter. It is kind of crazy to think about. Renato Moicano is actually on the longest win streak at 155 pounds. I mean, I guess it kind of makes sense though, right? Because at the highest level, those guys are all fighting each other and no one's that much better than the other guy. Look at Dustin Poirier versus Justin Gaethje. Those guys split their 2 fights. So everybody at the top is really good. And I guess, you know, before you get to that level, and when you look at all the guys that Renato's fought up to this point, they're not necessarily at that tip of the spear that Justin Gaethje, Dustin Poirier, Islam Makhachev, Arman Tsarukyan, Charles Oliveira level. But when you actually do dig into his record, especially in his last 4 straight wins, but 6 out of his last 7 fights, I mean, the guy beat Jai Herbert, a guy who gave Ilia Topuria a little bit of problems when they fought, and Renato submitted him in the 2nd round. Alex Hernandez submitted him. Lost RDA, unanimous decision though. He didn't get finished. Then he submitted Brad Riddell. Decision win over Drew Dober, but Drew Dober is a very tough fighter. And then, of course, how can you forget the fight against Jalen Turner, where I don't remember the odds, but I can tell you for a fact the odds were very much against Renato Moicano's favor going into that fight. And that was kind of a weird one, but the guy was able to prove everyone wrong, beat the odds, and get the win. And then his most recent one against Benoit Saint-Denis, who gave Dustin Poirier a lot of problems early on in their fight. And again, Renato getting the stoppage. When you really look at the momentum that he's riding going into this fight, I think it's actually a lot more significant than people give him credit for. And then on top of all that, you have to also think about this. Renato is just preparing for a fight against Beneil Dariush. Renato being number 10, Beneil being number 8. This was a big fight for Renato because a big finish could get him into the top 5 or very close to the top 5. But now leapfrogging all of the rest of the murderer's row that is the top 5 of 155 pounds, going straight to the champion, he's playing with house money because this is a pretty much 1 day notice, a day and a half notice. I don't think anyone's expecting anything of him out there. The guy goes out there and shows a lot of heart in a loss, and that does a lot for his stock. And if he's able to make something happen in there, I got to imagine there's a bit of a mental factor as well. If I'm Islam Makhachev and a guy like Renato Moicano that you did not train for starts to give you problems, starts to be a little bit tougher to take down than you initially thought, maybe a little bit harder to hit, or maybe he hits harder than you thought he would, and then you go forward into the later rounds. If Renato's able to have some success early in this one, it could pay dividends later on in this fight. Now again, I literally just made and posted a video breaking down the former main event between Islam and Arman, and I still maintain I think Arman is realistically the only guy at 155 that I personally would give a chance to beat Islam Makhachev, at the very least able to beat Islam on his best day. But none of us know if the Islam we're going to see in the cage in there is going to be on his best day, and it would be absolutely amazing to see Renato Moicano pull off the impossible. Now realistically, I'm 100% for sure taking Islam Makhachev in this fight. But I think that whenever there's these kinds of fights, these last-minute fights with extremely high stakes, that last-minute factor tends to go in one or two ways. Think back to Michael Bisping versus Luke Rockhold, which that was even more time. The guy had, I think it was 2 weeks notice, which is nothing. But then in comparison to, I don't know, 36 hours notice, feels like everything. He was able to end that left hook from absolutely nowhere and get himself the victory and the belt. He was able to change the course of his career. And I do think that at least some of it had to do with the fact that he was a last-minute replacement fight, and that does something to your psychology. You're training for somebody else, and now a guy who in your mind doesn't deserve this opportunity is there. All it takes is one lapse of judgment, or for him to show you something that you were not training for at all, something you were actually leaving yourself vulnerable to in sparring. I mean, really just one bad moment and it's all over. Or these kinds of last-minute fights can go a completely different direction, and Islam Makhachev has been in the situation before where he's in there with a guy who is not really supposed to be there. He's a last-minute replacement, and that unexpected factor works both ways. And some of these guys that might want to think that they can deal with that Dagestani grappling, that it's not as scary as it looks on TV, whether it's Dan Hooker or that mythical strength, it really is just that crazy, and they get stopped right away. So while I personally believe Islam Makhachev is probably going to make easy work of this fight, these kind of situations oftentimes do end in some pretty unexpected ways. I feel pretty confident that we're either going to get a fight that's more entertaining, more back and forth than any of us originally thought, or we're going to see an absolutely insane finish no matter which way it goes. Thanks for watching.